Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Energy the Untamed Heart podcast. I am your host, BL Fox, and I have the lovely Sara Rae joining me today for a chat about all things manifesting and crystal reiki, the journey of how do we get here, how do we get home, how does this play into our day to day, what goes on in the world. So I'm going to let Sara Rae jump on and do a little intro herself, and everything else will be in the show notes.
Hey guys, you're listening to the Energy of the Untamed Heart podcast, where we talk about uncaging your divinely gifted wild heart to be as free and expansive as you were born to be. My goal is to use our stories, guest interviews, and your questions to tease out what has been keeping your wild heart under wraps. I'm your host, Miel Fox, and together we will shatter the myths of our old stories to set our wild heart free. So thanks for choosing you and showing up today.
We're just going to have an informal chat and just talk about all the things. So,
Yeah.
Sara Rae,
Thank you
welcome.
for having me. Yes, I enjoyed our chat so much the last time we talked for my podcast. It was, it turned into something so amazing that I just was not expecting. So I'm just really excited to be here again.
Yeah, so it's so fun. So for the listeners who don't know, Sara Rae and I have traded podcasts. So I jumped on hers and we did a chat about numerology, and she's returning the favor and joining me today, so we can talk about some things involved with manifesting, talk about what is crystal Reiki, um, as opposed to non-crystal Reiki, and how did she get here? Like,
Yeah.
how did she get from there to here? And what are the kinds of things that really speak to her directly that she brings forward to help other people in the collective to find their vision, find their path? So
Yeah.
there we
Thank you for
go.
the opportunity. Yes.
Yeah.
My podcast is called the Spiritually Inspired Podcast. I'm well over 200 episodes now. So it's been many years that I've been yapping in your ears every week. So I love podcasting and talking about all spiritual things. So I'm looking forward to this sort of informal conversation. Those are always the best ones. But how did I get here? How much time do you have?
You
Actually,
you tell us anything that you want.
I will say that, I mean, comparatively to other people, like my story isn't some big, grand, incredible thing. Like it's not necessarily a story of overcoming huge adversity. It's not a story of like one day I woke up and I was hearing voices that weren't mine. It was very gradual. It was very intentional and it was very easy, I would say, very natural. It was very simple overall. So growing up, my family and I went to a Lutheran church, which I have fond memories of, relatively fond memories of. Like nothing too crazy. Like I know a lot of people, especially like any kind of Catholic denomination or their branches, they don't have the best associations with it. But I mean, I never had any problems with it. My mom was never like super pushy or anything like that. So we went to a Lutheran church until we just decided one day we were just kind of done and we just didn't go anymore. And it was fine. It was not a big deal. But we always believed, like as a family, we always believed in the universe and we always believed in magical things and the other side and ghosts and paranormal stuff. And it was never weird or shunned or foreign for me. So it was kind of just always part of my life. It was never like this weird thing that I just all of a sudden realized like there's another side and I need to know everything about it. I kind of felt like I always knew a lot about it because it was never weird in my life. And then I decided after my dad died when I was 15, I turned 16 shortly after that. I decided to drive myself to a Catholic church where I went the last couple years of high school and the first year or two of college. And then which is interesting because I like loved that church. It was beautiful. It was really kind people. But then I started to realize a lot of the problems that come with organized religion, just kind of like in a really gentle way. It wasn't anything like across the face. It wasn't anything rude or horrible. Like human rights weren't brought into question really at that time. So it was just kind of I started to realize like, oh, that doesn't really resonate with me anymore. So it was really gradual and purposeful, I guess. Like I took myself to church. Like it was never forced upon me. So maybe that's a unique thing that a lot of people don't really resonate with because a lot of people were like forced into religions and not me. It was a choice that I made until I discovered a crystal shop one day when I was in college. It was just there. And I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And it kind of felt like I was coming home. Like it happened so long ago now that the memories are kind of fuzzy, but I do remember walking in and thinking it was all familiar and yet it had never ever been part of my life. At least that part hadn't ever been part of my life before. I was like, oh yeah, crystals. Oh yeah, tarot. oh yeah, Reiki. Like it was just, oh yeah, this is a thing. Even though those words were never really used growing up, it was just more about like the other side specifically. And then that just kind of opened up that whole freaking rabbit hole into where we are today. So it probably took, I don't know, 10 years or so to that point. That happened when I was like in my early 20s. So yeah, it's been maybe 10 or 12 years since that happened. It's just been kind of growing ever since.
It's great. So, what I really find fascinating in what you say is, well, I never really thought about the crystals or Reiki or the tarot or the oracle or these other things, but yet they resonated so clearly and they felt so very familiar, almost like, oh, this feels like coming home. This is, aligned for me.
Yeah.
And since I'm a big geek about quantum physics, I
Yes.
really believe that this is just one window of overlapping parallel time space continuums for us. So the truth in my world is it resonated with you in this particular life because you've already experienced it in some other parallel life event
Yeah.
somewhere. So, this whole concept of past, present, future, that's us. We make that up because as a human, we like to have dimensionality to things. We like to put things in order. We like to assign labels and boxes to things. And so it makes us feel
Mhm.
comfortable to talk about something in the past, something in the present, and something in the future, when the reality is all you have is this very moment, like right now. And when people say, wow, I went to this place and it just felt so familiar to me, or I, picked up this book and it just, I feel like I've already read it. Well, assuming they haven't already read it, which is one of my things. I have a tendency to reread a lot of things, but
And you're like, this
that
seems
that's
familiar.
that's a little off the rails. But anyway, I digress. But I think that feeling that people get when they're like, this feels so familiar to me is because it's so familiar to us. We've
Hmm.
already been there, done it in some other moment, in some other time dimensional event. And so the fact that you say you walked in the store and it just like felt coming home to you, I'm like, well, yeah, because that's exactly what it is.
I totally
So I
agree.
find that really fascinating. The other thing that you speak of that I also find very fascinating is you say you took yourself to church,
Hmm.
which I think is really interesting because many people are raised with some form of an organized faith system, whatever it is. And I don't, I really don't care what people choose to follow or not follow, because in my world everybody's connected anyway. We're all
Yeah.
connected by whatever name you want to give it. And I think again, our humanness needs to have things sort of spelled out that makes us feel more comfortable when we can, open a book and go to a paragraph, or have some dude stand up front and say, "Oh, let me tell you the word because here's how it came through." And that's what makes our human feel good. But the truth is our soul doesn't really need any of that because our souls
Yeah.
are all connected anyway. And from whence we came is from whence we will go. So
Hmm.
I do believe for me, I was exposed to a lot of the different organized religions. My family was a split belief system. So rather than say you only have to go to one thing, we basically just kind of had to know all of it. Like you didn't have to participate necessarily, but you did have to learn about it.
Like different
So
religions.
yeah, yeah. So my father
Interesting.
was one and my mother was a split of two, and so we
Interesting.
weren't
That's unusual.
mandated. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a little different. So, we weren't mandated that you had to follow any one thing, but the upside to that is that you learn different cultures and different people choose different belief systems with the same common denominator of what's at the other end of that belief system, which is basically there's something out there that's bigger than us humans here, 3D on Earth. And you
Yes.
can call it whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And those of us who are a little more spiritually inclined, we don't necessarily need it all written out in a book. It comes
Yep.
to us differently. And like for me, my intuition and my higher self hears very clearly messages that come through in, I'll call it a dialect that makes sense to me. And then I'm able to take that information and bring messages through for other people in a different way. So to me, it's all coming from the same place. And then
Yeah,
it's just a matter of how are we interpreting, how are we translating, how are we integrating, and then using that for our souls to literally communicate with one another. Because truthfully, we're all connected in
absolutely.
my
I couldn't
world.
agree more.
Yeah,
I do
yeah.
believe that all world religions, no matter how different they are from one another, ultimately have the same goal. Whether
Hmm.
or not they meet the goal, I think is up for debate. But I mean, ultimately, it's about love and being connected and being unified. And obviously, there's something bigger than ourselves out there. And what I think was interesting about spirituality versus religion is that spirituality is really free form. Like there are no rules. I think a lot of us do tend to believe a lot of the same things, which is kind of a weird phenomenon. But when you are spiritual, there is no rule. Like my spiritual truth is different than your spiritual truth, even though I find a lot of it is similar anyway, versus like, like the Lutheran versus the Catholic, like they are minutely different, like very small differences. Like, and I apologize if you're Lutheran or Catholic, they not many differences. Even when you compare like the Jewish religion to the Christian religion, there's a lot of the foundations are the same. A lot of the different like Islamic religions are very similar too. So it's interesting that they all kind of have this common ground and yet they all branch off. And at the same time, they all meet again in the middle. So that's why I prefer spirituality because it is a little bit more free form, a little bit more expressive, a little bit more, tends to be a little bit more open-minded, not for everybody, but sometimes it is a little bit more open-minded. And plus we have cool rocks, all right?
We have cool rocks. Listen, and it's so funny because as the listeners can't see this, but I'm sitting at my work desk in my bedroom space. I live in a small apartment, but anyhow, my desk is riddled and covered. I mean, I'm not kidding you, covered in various stones and crystals, and they all are very uniquely chosen to kind of be with me
Oh
based
yeah.
on what I felt I needed at the time that I acquired.
Oh
And
yeah. I
it's
have a big
also very
collection as well.
interesting, huge collection, and it
Hmm.
sort of is like all over the place. And I have a tendency, okay, I'm telling the listeners things I don't really tell anybody. Okay, I'm going to tell you all this. When I record these episodes, I have a tendency to sit at my desk and one of my stones literally will be like, pick me up. And I tend to, you can see what I have in my hand at the moment. I tend to hold something in my hand as I'm talking. I cannot really give you an answer as to why I do it. I just know that I do it. And I also know which stone is the one that I need for that particular given conversation.
I love
It's
it.
it's not random. It's very, very
Oh no, I
specific.
don't believe in randomness.
And
No
I
chaos theory
never
for me.
question it.
Yeah,
I just
that's a
never
beautiful.
questioned it. I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, I guess I'll just be puttering with this particular stone
Is
today."
it amethyst that you
It
have right
is
now?
amethyst. It is
Hmm.
amethyst in my
It's
hand. I don't know
beautiful.
if you can see that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It matches
Yeah.
your hair.
Thank you.
Ooh,
Yeah,
so you have
and
that purple energy going on here. A lot of intuitive
I
connection,
have a
clarity.
lot of yes, I have a lot of that purple flame business goes on
I
with me
love
quite a
it.
bit. Yeah. And for the
Purple flame
listeners,
business.
maybe, they may not be familiar with this. If you wanted to share any of that, by all means, feel free. There's a whole nother, I'm going to call it the energy language dialect that is brought to us through colors,
Hmm.
through stones, through various crystals. Through a lot of different avenues. And it's so interesting when you ask someone like, oh, what colors do you have a tendency to be drawn to? What's very interesting is if someone goes with their first intuitive response, it's almost always very accurately coherent with how they move through the world.
Yes,
It's
absolutely.
very interesting how that occurs for people.
Yeah. My
Yeah.
3-year-old once told me that my love is green. And I'm like,
Yes.
interesting. And then she's like,
Yes.
Papa's love is red and my love is purple. And I was like, that's amazing. I love that.
Well,
So,
it actually is, and if we
yeah.
look at the chakra system and you look at the
Yes.
most common colors that are affiliated and aligned with these seven basic energy centers, there's really more than that, but
Oh,
we'll
yeah,
just go with the
absolutely.
basic seven, which is what most people are familiar with and what they are used to seeing. And if you look at those colors, there is a consistency of that color that moves from the head down through the body, through the third eye, and through the throat, and into the heart
Absolutely.
space and the solar plexus, and so on and so on. And
Yeah.
there's no coincidence to that either.
Oh,
So
no,
yeah,
absolutely not.
it's
Yeah.
really very fascinating. Yeah, just as the numerology carries very specific vibrational frequency, so do colors, as we all know.
Yes.
I
They
mean, that
really
is why
do.
you have a measurable color spectrum. You know, we have the
Yes.
visible light spectrum, we have the not visible light spectrum, and each of these colors holds a very measurable, very clear vibrational frequency that can be ascertained. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you are new to crystals, that is a really good thing to remember. If you are from at all familiar with chakras, you can kind of equate what the stone color is to each chakra, and you can kind of assume it's a similar energy. Of course, everything is a little bit different, but like most, for the most part, most purple stones connect to the third eye chakra, which is, your center of intuition, of clarity, of spirit connection, that sort of thing. Most crystals that are green, represent, unconditional love and compassion and kindness. So it's a really good place to start is looking at the color of the crystal and going, what color does or what does this represent energetically? What color or what energy does this color represent
Yeah.
energetically? So you don't
Yeah.
necessarily need to memorize. I'm not big into memorizing things, mostly because I just don't have the
No.
headspace for that. But that's not very intuitive, like feeling the need to rely on something. But if you just go, oh, this yellow stone, yellow is the color of the sun. The sun makes me happy. The sun is life bringing. Like you just kind of into it with whatever the stone looks like. It's a really good place to start. You don't need to rely on other people or other people's interpretations of the energy for when it comes to
Absolutely.
stones. Yeah.
Absolutely. And truthfully, it's the same in the land of numerology. We touched on it very, very lightly at our last chat, but people
Yeah.
are like, so what does this card mean? And again, you can look at a database, you can look through the Google, you can read reference texts, but the reality is, if you just get quiet and listen to what your higher self is speaking about a given number, it will become fairly accurate to what the representation is.
Right.
You know, you don't really have to overthink it. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting, regardless of the modality, whether it's crystals or it's numbers or it's planets, any of the things. I really feel when people say, "Well, I can't do that," everybody has it within them
Yes.
to utilize their intuition to whatever degree one wants to. It's a little bit like a muscle. The more you use it, the more better it gets, right?
Absolutely. I
Just
totally
like
agree.
anything else, the more the more you engage with it and make it work a little more, the better you will become with it. And so that applies to everything. That applies to how does one choose to interpret an oracle card or a
Yeah. Or
tarot
tarot.
card or a numerology card or whatever the thing may be.
Mm.
So I think when we get out of our own way and let our higher self take the driver's seat, a lot of the messages that are meant to be coming through for us from beyond our 3D can knock at the door a whole lot easier than our typical human bogged down with either control, managing, or too many things going on in our brain that we can't get quiet enough to hear and listen to the heart.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
true. That's so true. And I often wonder if that part of that comes from us being so used to organized religion, where there is like a written set of rules, like this is how you practice, this is what it means, these are the rules that you follow. And because that doesn't necessarily exist in spirituality, it's all whatever you make it. A lot of us like inherently feel lost at first, and we're like, what do I do? How do I know this is right? Air quotes. Because I often wonder if is that just like ingrained in us so deeply that we feel like we can't, like we need to be in our own way because it's not right if we just go with the flow. Like there needs to be more structure to it. I don't know.
Well,
Something to think
yeah,
about.
I mean, it is something to think about, and it's a really valid point because I do think that as a human in mass society, whatever culture one's brought up in, it doesn't really make a difference what that is. Rules are put in place, truthfully, for control, for
Yeah,
some level of control, to either,
absolutely.
not have utter chaos in the land of what we consider to be civilized existence. So we create rules. They're sounded like they're boundaries that are placed out there. We do this and we don't do this. We do it like this, but we don't do it like that. So at the basic level, it's a controlling event. I don't really care how you want to label that, but that's societal programming. The difference between that and the spaciousness that's allowed in the quantum possibility of spiritual communication, because that really doesn't have a bunch of fence posts to it. It's all out there in waveform, and there you go. So that openness and that spaciousness and that, I'm going to call it, lack of control is compared to something that has delineated boundaries, let's say, I think is an absolute. It shows up. You can see that difference between something that's organized with structure and rules and whatever you want to call them, guidelines, commandments, whatever,
Yeah.
and the openness of the universe and spirit and being able to receive information in any multitude of ways without the need to control how it's coming through to us, the human.
Yeah. That is the hardest
Yeah.
part about intuitive guidance, I think, is not feeling the need to control it, because I find that a lot of people who, like, they come to me and they want to be more intuitive, they automatically assume that clairvoyance is the way to go, right? Like they want to be clairvoyant. They want to see the movies. They want to have like the Raven Simone visions in their brain, right? That's So Raven TV show, if
Right.
you remember. They want that because that for some reason is like superior. They feel like they can, do better, like they'd be more intuitive that way. It's the easiest to interpret supposedly, but people try to control it in that way where they go, I want to be clairvoyant, I'm going to work on this, when that might not be the best way for them. So I do think a lot of people try to control it a little bit too much, but that's the kind of the beautiful thing about spirituality in the end, where it teaches you to let go and allow and just be. And there's so
Yep,
much
that
more.
that surrender and release piece
Hmm.
is really the cornerstone of allowing your intuition to really blossom. I think we're given, as humans, we're given senses, taste, hearing, smell, vision, all those things here, auditory, speech, everything. We're given certain intake sensors, let's call them that, as a human. Your soul doesn't need any of that. Your
Right.
soul doesn't require that. So, as a result of those intakes, that's where we develop our clairs. So, clairvoyance, claircognizance. There's a clair associated with smell. There's a clair
Yeah.
associated with touch. I mean,
And
there's
taste.
in taste. So forgive me, they all have fancy
They
names,
have
and I
names.
don't
Yeah.
recall
Don't
them
don't
all.
ask me what
But
they are.
whatever. What I can tell you is they're all connected to those five human senses, and it's not magic. It's not like, oh, you get this and I get that. It is whatever speaks most naturally to your higher self.
Hmm. Like for me, I'm
And
very clairaudient. That's definitely my preferred way to receive messages. It's coming.
mhm,
I don't think I am very naturally clairvoyant, although it does happen. But for me, it's definitely clairaudient. And then whatever the clair smell is, I get that one a lot too.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's really fascinating when you think of that, because it's kind of out of what one would expect to be the quote unquote norm. Like, why
Yeah.
would you, out of nowhere suddenly, I don't know, smell brownies when you're nowhere near an
Yeah.
oven or brownie mix, right?
Yeah. Or grandma's
Um,
perfume or something.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's really interesting how each of us receives. For myself, my strongest clair, and everybody has clairs, it's just a
Oh
matter,
yeah.
again, of how do we choose to allow it or not allow it, or foster it or don't foster it. My strongest clair is I'm claircognizant. I can't
Mm,
necessarily tell you how I know things, but I know things. And
yeah.
and it just comes through like as if it like as if something's right in front of me. It's that obvious. It's just, I don't know. I don't really
That's
have a good
one people
answer for
second guess a
why
lot.
they're claircognizance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people are a lot of people are more claircognizant than they realize because they
Mm,
just brush it off. I feel like that's the one that's the most underrated, because also clair smelling is very underrated, I feel like. But yeah,
yeah.
people don't realize how claircognizant they are because they just go, well, that's my own thought. I came up with that. Me, the ego came up with that. but
Well,
probably
and
not.
and
Not
and
all
the
the
thing
time.
is, when people say, "Oh, there's nobody here but me," I'm like, "Oh, you are so very incorrect there. Like the room is always crowded, my friend.
Oh yeah,
Like you think you're by
absolutely.
yourself, but you are so not by yourself.
Right, in the
You
most
know,
loving way
between
possible. Not in a creepy way.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But, I mean, between spirit guides and angels and archangels and all these other, soul essence influences that are coming through and offering you, whether it's visual information or auditory information or whatever that is, the, very infrequently is that thought that's coming through your brain actually coming through your brain from you.
Yeah.
It does after the first 6 seconds, then you start to question it. But the
Yes.
thing that comes through in the first 6 seconds is pretty dang accurate. And it's
Mhm.
typically what is really at the base of whatever's going on.
Right. That
So,
gut
but
reaction,
again,
that inner knowing
yeah,
is so
it's so
powerful.
accurate.
It is. It really is. Like, how many times have you been in a situation where you just, maybe not you specifically because you've honed this skill, but listeners, how many times have you been in a situation where you had an initial gut feeling, you brushed it off, and then your initial gut feeling or inner knowing, whatever it is, was proven right later down the line? Then you kick yourself and you go, I should have known. I can
But
think
you
of like
did
20
know,
off the top. Yeah,
right?
right. But
But
you
you
didn't
did
trust
know,
it. You
right? But
did.
you don't
Right.
trust it. Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think at the crux, like if somebody said, "What are the foundations of spirituality?" To me, it is definitely about trust, trusting
Mm-hmm.
your intuition, trusting that there's something more than just us 3D ears down here.
Trust that something is
Trusting
happening.
that you are being supported by
Yes.
infinite beings. That word trust to me is a big foundational piece. The the letting go or the unattachment to what does something have to mean or what does something
Mm,
represent or what is the next step after that step, that capacity to be inspired and lean into your intuition and follow it like little breadcrumbs and not hold like, well, what does this mean? And oh,
I
well,
struggle with that.
I did it and then it didn't work out. Well,
Yeah.
okay, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, there's no rule book that says it's gonna.
Right.
So I think for many of us that capacity to really allow and let go, I will tell you, as a control freak, a recovering control freak, that's a tough one for me. That's a really tough one for me.
After our chat about numerology for the Spiritually Inspired podcast, I can't remember exactly what you had said, but you used the word allow. And like whatever it was, I have to go back and listen to it again. But in that moment, it hit me so deep that I was like, that is the word. So I don't know if you do this, but for the word of the year for myself for 2025 is
Yeah,
going to be allow. So
good
that
for
it's,
you.
that gets,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So yeah, last year for me it was peace, and I feel like I really did cultivate that very well. But this year it's allow because I do feel like I'm in my own way a lot. I second guess things a lot. I kind of go, what's the deeper meaning? I do truly believe that everything does happen for a reason. Like there are no coincidences, there are no small things. Everything is that deep. Like I truly do believe that. But the question really is, do I need to know it all immediately right now? Or can I just allow things to exist? Like, yes, there might be a deeper reason why this particular bird just landed on my deck as I was looking out the window. There might be a deeper reason. There probably is, but do I need to know it right now? No, I'm just going to allow it to be what it is. You know?
There's that piece, and then there's also, must we read into, well, what does this really mean?
Right.
Right? So the bird lands on your back step, let's say, or your back deck or whatever. And, could it be great grandma popping in for a visit? Sure. Could it be, just in the moment, in that very moment, the beauty of what that brings to you that makes you feel fulfilled in your heart, that moment of
Yes.
joy when you
Yeah.
see the bird sitting in the dead of winter on your back deck,
Right.
that little instance, maybe that's all that is. It's just
Exactly.
there. It's just there to bring you, kind of snap your awareness to look at the beauty in the moment of things. Look at what you have right here and now versus stay in the moment, be in the now versus what does this mean down the road? Well,
Yes.
what's the deeper meaning of this?
Yeah. And I've
Sometimes maybe it isn't. Maybe it's a reminder to stay present.
Yes, I find that that is the case most of the time. But then
Yeah.
when there's like the weirder things that happen that really do jerk me, or they happen in like threes, like a
Yeah.
cardinal lands on my deck 3 days in a row. Okay, maybe now it's something a little bit more. But like one
Yeah.
time so I live in like rural Minnesota. I live off the Mississippi River. And a couple years ago, probably like 5 years ago now, I like live in like in not the city. It's not a city by any means, but it is like suburbia, like neighborhoods, like not anywhere near the woods. Okay. So I live off of the Mississippi River. And a couple years ago I was driving home and I was working nights. So I was driving home late at night and a fox ran across the road, which is very unusual. Like it's in the middle of a neighborhood in the middle of the night and I saw a fox. And like that was like the only time I'd ever seen a fox like not in the wild. So like in like it's a more natural habitat. So in my opinion, like that meant something in that moment. And I felt like that was something I was meant to see. But then I also, like in the middle of winter, look out my window and there is a set of blue jays that live in my yard. And every time I see them, I think they're beautiful, but they're not necessarily bringing me a spirit message every single time I see them because
Right.
they're not to say that they're not special and beautiful, but they're not weird. They're not out of place, as opposed to like a
Yeah.
random fox running down a suburbia street randomly.
Yeah.
So, not randomly, I
Yeah.
don't believe but like unexpectedly.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess to me, and we all do this, it's sort of like you can go from the two extremes. You can go from the end of you're so dulled out that you don't pay attention to anything, like you don't notice
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
and you just kind of go through your life zoned out, and you miss all the things. You miss the beauty of the flowers, you miss the bird flying up through the tree, you miss the owl swooping down, or whatever, right? And then there's the flip side, which is, do we now read into everything? Well, what does this
Mm.
mean? And what about this? What about that? And then
Yep.
again, part of what I really feel, there's an enormous piece of the messaging, which to me a lot of times is just a gentle nudge of awareness from
Yes.
universe, from spirit to say, hey, we're here.
Hmm.
Hey,
You're not
we see
alone.
you. Hey, you're not alone. Hey, we
Yeah.
love you. Hey, we're really
Things are gonna be
connected
okay.
here. It's
Yeah.
all gonna pan out. No sweat.
Yeah.
Just when you think it's not
Absolutely.
flying, here we are. We're here for you. So there's always that kind of balance point of how much do you read into it and how much don't you read into it.
Yeah. I know really
And
only you can answer that
again,
question.
yeah, only every individual knows. And then, of course, it's one of those things, maybe you get up in the morning and maybe you like to do your morning meditation, you pull a card or whatever it is. And, maybe your thought of the day or your intention of the day as you go to pull your card is, what might be important for me to learn today, or what message might I need to receive today, or universe, I'm struggling with XYZ. Could you show me a sign that would give me some idea that whatever you're listening. I don't know. People say whatever they say in the morning. And then what I find interesting is, if you've asked for this, then wake the hell up and pay attention, because
Yes.
the things that you've just asked for are going to show up, not necessarily in your time frame, but they're going to show up.
Yeah.
And they're going to show up in like weirdities. Like maybe you're driving behind somebody and their license plate is, I don't know, some relative's birth date or something. Or
Or
you look
six
over
six
at
sick, which
six,
is what I
right,
saw.
666. Or
Yeah.
your radio's tuned in and it's 1111, or who knows? I
Or
mean,
you look
the
up and you
red
see a
hawk
hawk
flies in
carrying a
front.
snake.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I've seen that before. It
Yeah.
was really cool. But
Yeah. So I
yeah.
think if you put the intention there and you say, "Hey, I feel like I need a little assistance here. Can you help me out?" It is
Mm,
always amazing to me just how willing universe is to share the info.
absolutely. That's one of my favorite
Yeah.
things about spirituality because
Yeah.
that's another thing about religion, not to continue off beating that dead horse, but religion tends to move God further away from you. Because you have the priests, or you have like the clergy, or the pope, or whatever your religion has it. Like there's that special elite group of people that are really close to God, and you need to listen to what they're saying because they're the ones that are close to God. But then in spirituality, when it's not a specific set of rules that we're following, the universe is the God, whatever you want to call it, is right here all the time. It's like a breath away. always at all times. So
Okay, it's
that's
less than a breath away in
yeah,
my world.
I totally
Because
agree.
to
Absolutely.
me, we are all God's self. We are
Yeah.
all, and I mean, this is how my brain works. If we all come from God, we all come from universe, then that means that we are all a piece of that, which means
Yes.
we all contain that divinity within ourselves. And granted, some of us need the structure of going to church or temple or
Sure.
sitting in the sand or whatever you need. Hey, it's fine. There's room for everybody. No worries. But at the end of the day, the design of our soul existing in our human being for the length that we're here on earth to learn all the things and have the lessons and the adventures is to ultimately walk back home to ourselves to know that we are the divinity within ourselves. So what we seek outside of us is present within us.
Yeah.
And I find that for many people, they spend an awful lot of time, including clients who come to me, clients who go to you, they're looking outside of themselves for the answers. And I
Hmm.
think part of what you and I do as light workers, healers, conduits of information, whatever you want to call that, is not to give people their answers because the answers are within themselves, but it's
Yeah.
to help them clear away the cobwebs so that they can understand and see the divinity within themselves.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I always
Yeah.
say that getting like reading for yourself, like tarot reading for yourself or doing Reiki for yourself is empowering, but doing it from somebody with like receiving it from somebody else or reading from somebody else or Reiki from somebody else is validating. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but you don't want to
Yeah.
only go to other people. You know, you have that within
Yes.
you already. Like
We all have
I
it.
have a girlfriend who
Yes.
tells me that every time she goes and gets her cards read, it's always the same like four cards. That so they always show up, right? And I'm like, so are you heeding those messages or what? She's like, I don't know. They're just there and all this stuff. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, what are you? I love you, but what are you doing? Like, you,
Yeah.
how many times do you need to get that message? And she's like, that's why I don't need to know. I don't need to read cards because it's always the same. And I'm like, there's something there, right?
Well, there's something there, and God bless the universe because they'll just keep on showing up and offering you the message till you finally get it. The
So
only trouble
patient.
is it keeps coming at you louder and louder until
Yes.
finally, if you don't pay attention, they're going to sit you on your ass, and you'll have no choice but to pay attention
Yeah.
in some way.
I try not to get to that
And
point.
yeah, our human doesn't like that, but that's
Yeah,
really the name of the game when,
it is.
people say I have X, Y, and Z occurring. Yeah, well, there's a reason for that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's always
Yeah.
in my opinion, it is always inherently good. You know, like the universe isn't punishing
Oh,
ever,
never.
ever.
Ever.
And that's another thing I really struggle with religion. There's that element of punishment that I just I never got on board with that. But with spirituality and universe and being in love and light and God's self and all that beautiful stuff, it's always more about just being in the light and being in love and feeling the goodness and the whole purpose is to learn and to grow, not salvation, not necessarily like planning for the afterlife so that you're not burning or anything like that. It's just more so that you can learn and grow in this life right now because it's a positive thing. So no matter how dire the circumstances or how painful the experience might be, the eternal optimist in me always says it's for good reason in the end. It's like
So it always works through.
yeah,
Yes.
you didn't do anything to deserve
Absolutely.
that, but you
No,
can
it's
always
all
learn from
about
it.
what will you learn from it? How can you
Exactly.
be curious and what will you learn from it? Because the bottom line, I don't really care what your question is, your answer is going to be love. It doesn't
Yeah.
really matter. You ask whatever you want, and when you bear it back down to bare bones, the answer will be love.
Yeah.
And I believe that because I believe that is what we come from and that is what we return to. And so
I
everything that
agree.
happens in between is it's just what happens in between. That's the learning curve. Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Very well
Yeah.
said. That's why we say love and light, because
Love
that's
and
what it
light.
is. Love and
Yeah.
light.
Yeah. So where do people find more love and light and find you?
Wise do my best to spread the love and the light every Friday with the Spiritually Inspired podcast, wherever you can get your pods. I also have my entire website, spirituallyinspired.co, all kinds of good manifesting stuff on there. Got my books, got some workshops on there, got a manifesting bundle, got my Facebook group linked to there. So you can find all of that
That's
there.
the place to go. You
It
got
is.
it. Perfect.
Thank
I'll put
you.
everything, absolutely. I'll put it all in the show notes so people can find you, and I know you are on social media,
Oh, yeah.
so they can catch you there.
Yes. I'm not the best at social media, but I'm there. You might see
Okay.
a cat or a baby there occasionally, but
All right. That's all right. When people, those who need to find you will find their way to you.
Yes,
That's what
I
I
totally
really
agree.
believe. Like those who need to hear this podcast, they're going to find their way to this, and that's going
I
to be
absolutely
just
agree.
fine.
Yes,
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Cool.
I'm glad you did too.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. So I will get this rocking and we'll put it all together and I'll get it up in the next couple of weeks and we'll switch up and listen to podcasts.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you for taking time today. It's been a great chat.
You too. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.